How did two simple words just flip the entire conversation around Shedeur Sanders overnight? No press conference, no interviews, no big announcement, just a quiet post. Thank you, a photo of him back in that number 2 jersey. That's it. But somehow, that moment hit harder than any headline could. Within hours, everything changed. Fans weren't just reacting, they were locking in. The energy shifted instantly. Conversations got louder. Debates started popping up everywhere. And it didn't feel forced either, it felt real. Like people had been waiting for this exact moment without even realizing it. But here's the part most people are missing. This wasn't about a jersey. It wasn't about marketing. It wasn't about selling merch. And it definitely wasn't some random off-season move. This was a message, and it didn't need extra words to explain it. Because if you've been paying attention, you know the version of Shedeur people saw before, that wasn't the full version. That was controlled. That was him adjusting, staying quiet, playing within a situation that didn't fully let him be himself yet. And now, that version is gone. Going back to number 2 isn't just a switch, it's a signal. It's him stepping back into his identity, the version of himself that built the hype in the first place. The confident, composed, unbothered quarterback who plays like the moment is never too big. And the timing, that's what makes this even more interesting. Because this didn't happen randomly. This happened right before things in Cleveland start getting serious. The Cleveland Browns quarterback situation is heating up. The competition is real. And now, right before all of that unfolds, he makes this move. So now the question isn't why he changed the number. It's what that change really means. Because if this is him stepping into the version of himself he's been holding back, then everything we are about to see might look very different. It didn't come with a warning, no build-up, no leaks, just 2 words, and suddenly the entire conversation changed. When Shedeur Sanders posted, "Thank you God," alongside a photo of himself back in that number 2 jersey, it didn't look like much at first glance. No flashy reveal, no cameras, no long caption explaining the decision. Just a quiet moment dropped into the timeline like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Within minutes, the reaction started building. Fans picked it up first, then analysts, then everyone else. And what made it different was how natural it felt. There was no campaign behind it, no forced hype pushing it forward. The momentum came straight from the audience. People weren't just reacting, they were connecting it to something deeper. Because it felt like a signal. Not loud, not dramatic, but intentional, like something had just shifted without needing to be announced. And the more people looked at it, the more it started to hit. This wasn't just a number change, it felt like a reset. That's why the energy around it spread so fast. You could see it in the conversations. The tone wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Fans who had been watching closely didn't treat it like breaking news. They treated it like confirmation, like something they'd been expecting finally showed up. And that's what made it powerful. Because in a league where everything is usually overproduced, every move packaged, explained, and dissected before it even happens, this felt completely different. No explanation, no justification, just a move that spoke for itself. And somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. Even the people who tried to downplay it couldn't ignore the reaction. The post kept spreading, the discussion kept growing, and the deeper you looked, the more you realized this wasn't random timing either. It landed at the exact moment when attention was already building. Which raises the real question, if something this small created that much noise, what does it mean for what's coming next? But here, where the conversation starts to get completely misunderstood, because this was never really about a jersey. On the surface, it's easy to see why people framed it that way. A number change, that sounds like branding, marketing, something designed to boost sales or spark attention during a quiet part of the off-season. And at first glance, that explanation feels safe. But it doesn't hold up. Because if this was just about marketing, it wouldn't have felt like that. It wouldn't have triggered that kind of reaction. You don't get that level of energy from a simple branding decision. That kind of response comes from something deeper, something people recognize without needing it explained. And that's exactly what happened with Shedeur Sanders. The number 12, that wasn't his identity. That was a version of him that was adjusted, controlled. It was the version that walked into a complicated situation and chose to stay measured instead of making noise. A version that held back just enough to avoid becoming the center of controversy too early. And that takes discipline. Because not every player can step into the spotlight and choose to dim it on purpose, especially not someone with expectations, attention, and pressure already surrounding them. But that's what he did. He adapted. He stayed patient. He played within the moment instead of trying to force it. But here, the key. Just because he adjusted does mean that was who he really was. And now, that adjustment period looks like it's over. Going back to number 2 isn't just a preference. It's not random. It's not cosmetic. It's a return, a reset, a signal that the version of himself he was holding back is no longer being held back. And if you've watched him before, you already know what that version looks like. More confident, more in control, more natural in how he plays. The kind of presence that doesn't feel forced, it just shows up. That's what people are reacting to, even if they can't fully explain it. So when people say this is just about a jersey, they're missing the point completely. Because what actually happened here is a shift. And once you understand that, everything that comes next starts to look very different. But if you really want to understand why this moment matters, you have to go back to what he just went through. Because the version of Shedeur Sanders people saw last season, that wasn't a full picture, it was a test. And it wasn't an easy one. From the moment he stepped into the league, the noise was already there. The draft slide became a storyline, the label stuck. Suddenly, everything he did was being judged through that lens. Every rep, every decision, every small mistake, it all got magnified. And it didn't stop. There were constant conversations about the quarterback room, who should start, who shouldn't, who fits better, and whether it was fair or not, his name was always in the middle of it, not just as a player, but as a debate. That kind of environment, it can mess with guys. Because it's not just about learning the playbook or adjusting to the speed of the game. It's about blocking out everything happening around you while still trying to grow. And for a rookie, that's one of the hardest things to do. But here, what makes this part different? He didn't react. No public back and forth, no emotional responses, no trying to fight every narrative that popped up. Instead, he stayed steady, showed up, did the work, took everything in without letting it shake him. And that's not easy. Because when the headlines don't match how you see yourself, the natural instinct is to push back, to prove people wrong immediately. But instead, he played the long game. He absorbed it, learned from it, adjusted quietly. And that's why this matters now. Because what looked like inconsistency to some might have actually been adaptation. What looked like hesitation might have been discipline. He wasn't just playing football, he was figuring out how to operate in a completely different environment. And that kind of growth doesn't always show up right away. But it builds. So when you see him now stepping back into something that feels natural, something that represents who he really is, it hits differently. Because it's not just a change. It's the result of everything he had to sit through to get here. And if that process really did shape him the way it looks like it did, then the version people are about to see might not be the same one they've been judging. But to really understand why this moment is hitting so hard, you have to understand what that number actually represents. Because for Shedeur Sanders, number 2 isn't just a jersey, it's his natural state. That's the version people remember. That's the version that took over games at Jackson State, the version that carried momentum into Colorado, the version that played with a certain rhythm, a certain confidence that didn't look forced, it just looked normal. Smooth decisions, calm under pressure, in control of everything happening around him. That's what number 2 represents. It's not hype, it's not branding, it's familiarity. It's the version of himself that doesn't have to think about being comfortable because he already is. And that's why this shift feels different. Because when he was wearing 12, everything about his game felt slightly adjusted. Not bad, but measured. Like he was playing within limits instead of playing freely. Like he was focused on fitting into the situation rather than fully owning it. But number 2, that's not fitting in. That's taking over. And there's a reason people keep using that fire analogy. Some have said, you went through the fire, got purified, and came out different. It sounds dramatic, but when you actually break it down, it fits. Because last season wasn't smooth. It wasn't built for comfort. It was pressure, noise, constant evaluation, the kind of environment that either sharpens you or exposes you. And now, this moment feels like the result of that process. Not a restart, but an evolution. Because when a player steps back into something that represents who they really are, especially after going through that kind of pressure, it changes how they move. It changes how they carry themselves. It changes how they approach every rep. And you can already feel that shift starting. That's why people who understand his game aren't even focused on the number itself. They're focused on what it means mentally, because this isn't just a visual change, it's a mindset change being shown publicly. And if that mindset matches what shows up on the field, then this moment might end up meaning a lot more than people expect. But here, where everything starts to line up, and it's not a coincidence. Because the timing of this move, it might be the most important part of the entire story. Shedeur Sanders didn't switch back to number 2 in the middle of the season. He didn't do it during a quiet stretch where nobody's paying attention. This happened right before OTAs, right before things in Cleveland start getting real. And that matters. Because this is the phase where roles begin to take shape. This is where the Cleveland Browns start evaluating who's actually ready to lead. Not based on hype, not based on headlines, but on reps, decisions, and command of the offense. And from what's being said around the situation, this isn't going to be a everyone gets equal chances type of competition. There's been talk that reps will be earned, not handed out. That performance, and more importantly, momentum, will play a major role in how things unfold. And if that's true, then timing like this becomes even more interesting. Because right as that competition is about to heat up, he makes this move. Now, to be fair, there's been a lot of buzz online about what's happening inside that quarterback room. Some reports claim certain players haven't been as visible around the facility, while others suggest the coaching staff already has a clearer picture than they're letting on. None of that is fully confirmed, but the speculation alone tells you how much attention is on this situation. And right in the middle of all that, you've got Shedeur stepping forward. Not loudly, not with a big statement, but in a way that signals something. Confidence. Because this isn't the move of someone unsure of where they stand. This isn't someone easing into the moment. This feels like someone who understands exactly what's coming and is choosing to meet it head-on. And that's what makes the timing so powerful. Because when you align identity with opportunity at the exact same moment, that's when things can shift fast. So now, heading into OTAs, the conversation changes. It's no longer about potential. It's about who's ready right now. And this is where everything flips, from potential to expectation. Because up until this point, Shedeur Sanders had something protecting him, a cushion, a label people could lean on. He's still adjusting, he needs time, let him develop. That safety net, it's gone now. The moment he stepped back into number 2, the message changed. Whether he said it out loud or not, what people heard was simple: he's ready. And once that signal is out there, everything that follows gets judged differently. There's no easing into it anymore. Every throw matters, every read matters, every single rep in practice starts getting looked at through a different lens. not as a rookie learning, but as someone trying to take control, and that's a completely different level of pressure. Because in this league, confidence is a double-edged sword. If you show it and back it up, you rise fast, people buy in, teammates respond, coaches start trusting you more, momentum builds quickly. But if you show it and don't deliver, the reaction is just as fast in the opposite direction. And that's the reality he's stepping into now. There's no more middle ground where people can just wait and see. The expectations are immediate, the spotlight is sharper, and the margin for error way smaller than it was before. At the same time, this is also the opportunity. Because moments like this don't just create pressure, they create separation. This is where players stop being interesting prospects and start becoming real options, real leaders, real answers to a team's biggest question. And inside the Cleveland Browns building, that question is very real right now. Who's QB1? That's not a storyline anymore. It's a decision that's getting closer every single day. And in situations like this, perception starts to matter almost as much as performance. If you look like the guy, carry yourself like the guy, and produce like the guy, things start shifting before anything is officially announced. That's the lane he's stepping into. But here, the key, this moment doesn't guarantee anything. It only raises the stakes. Because now, it's not about what he could become. It's about proving who he already believes he is. And then there's the part of this story that people keep overlooking, but it might be the loudest signal of all. Because while everyone's been debating takes and narratives around Shedeur Sanders, the numbers have already been speaking. Real numbers. As a rookie, without being fully established, without even having a locked-in starting role, he still finished among the top jersey sellers across the entire league. Not just rookies, not just young players, the entire NFL. Let that sit for a second. We're talking about a player still trying to prove himself, still dealing with constant questions, still navigating a crowded quarterback room. And somehow, he's sitting in the same conversation as names like Saquon Barkley and Josh Allen when it comes to jersey sales. That doesn't just happen. That's not luck, that's not timing, that's influence. Because jersey sales don't come from stats alone. They come from connection, from presence, from people feeling like they're watching something before it fully breaks out. And clearly, there's a large group of fans who already see something in him. And here's what makes it even more interesting. This isn't happening on a flashy team known for pushing merchandise or dominating headlines through branding. The Cleveland Browns aren't exactly leading the league in aesthetic hype or trend-driven attention. So if it's not the team carrying the numbers, then what is? It's him. Plain and simple. That kind of impact shows up before the results sometimes, before the stats catch up, before the role is fully defined. It shows up in how people respond, how they engage, how they invest early. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. Which is why this number switch matters even more than people realize. Because now it's not just recognition, it's alignment. The identity people already connected with is back. The number that represents his peak version is back. And when those two things match up at the same time, that's when things can take off fast. So while some people are still questioning whether he's ready, the numbers might already be pointing in a different direction. And when you step back and look at everything, the noise, the debates, the pressure, the quiet adjustments, it all leads to this exact moment. Because this was never just about a jersey. For Shedeur Sanders, that switch back to number 2 is a signal, not to the media, not to social media, but to everyone watching closely. It's him saying, without saying it, that the version you've been seeing isn't the final version. And now that version is gone. What replaces it is something a lot more clear, more confident, more direct. A player who isn't trying to fit into the situation anymore, but someone who's ready to shape it. And that's a completely different energy. At the same time, the timing makes this impossible to ignore. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum, this is happening right as the Cleveland Browns are heading into one of the most important stretches of their offseason. The quarterback competition is real. Decisions are coming. Roles are about to be defined. And right before all of that unfolds, he makes this move. That's not random. That's positioning. But here's the part that really matters. None of this guarantees anything. Not the jersey, not the reaction, not the momentum. Because once the ball is snapped, none of that carries over unless it's backed up. That's the reality of this league. Every player gets tested the same way, on the field, in real time, with no room to hide behind narratives. And that's where everything shifts. Because now it's not about what people believe anymore. It's not about hype or doubt or speculation. It's about proof. This is the point where potential turns into production, where confidence either translates or gets questioned, where everything that's been building finally meets reality. So now the real question is whether this moment meant something. It's what comes next. Because if this version of Shedeur Sanders shows up the way people think it will, then this isn't just a small off-season storyline. This is the beginning of something much bigger. But if it does, then everything resets. Either way, the answer is coming soon.